plan of this shed and we've got framed elevations. We started drawing the roof framing to understand what we were trying to do, but in order to understand this really well, it makes more sense to draw a section. So I'm going to move this framed elevation up, and just like before, I'm going to use projection in order to represent this section. Now we already had some of this represented in section previously from another day, so we're going to use this as the basis, but like I said, we have to adjust it slightly. So we're not using plasterboard, this is going to be plywood. I might just copy this instead. Move, drag a copy. And instead of being 7 mil, this is going to be 12 mil. So we'll add an extra 5, so that's a total of 12. We don't want that. We will move this sarking, so it's just against the stud. In this case, I'm more interested in showing the true thickness rather than the actual thickness. And I'll move all of these so they're hard up against the stud. This is our bottom plate, or it can be our bottom plate. We'll assume this is our skirting board. So we've already talked about that we're bringing up that plywood 10 millimeters. Now we need a concrete slab. We haven't shown that yet. We've just been using a red line at the moment to represent the concrete slab. So for now, I'll just continue that. I'll just use a horizontal line to represent the concrete slab, and then we can come back and look at the detailing of how that might work a bit later. Like I said, when we're doing weatherboard, we have to start at the bottom. So we need to consider how this looks, how this works. Do I want the weatherboard to extend down past the edge of the concrete slab? So in this case, I'm going to stop this here, and I'm going to take the weatherboard up. So the weatherboard is sitting flush. Let's try to get this vertical. Flush with the bottom of the frame. Now I'm not sure in this circumstance, I don't want to have a situation where the weatherboard is getting too close to the natural ground. So instead of running the weatherboard down past, I'm going to instead use a folded flashing or capping in order to be able to take that down past the edge of the slab. For now, we won't worry about that. We're just going to copy the rest of these, move, drag multiple copies, and we'll extend this up a few times. Just more than I need is generally the rule. Extend this insulation, extend the frame. And now what I could do to make this really easy is to take a copy of this, move, drag a copy, and position it down beside. And then that's going to show me or remind me how long my stud needs to be. So I've got my bottom plate. I'll duplicate that, and that'll create my top plate. Now I have two, so there's one here, and there's one below that. That's therefore the top of my stud. I also have a noggin. Now remember, the noggin is in a few different places, but it doesn't really matter as long as I show it in one location at the moment. So let's just say the noggin is there. I can extend this insulation as needed, and then I can copy this insulation as needed. I'll extend this plywood up, and again it was stopping 10 mil short of the double stud. And just to check that, that should mean that the plywood is 2400 total, which is what it's showing as. So that's great. Now that we're in section, we're going to be able to explain and understand how this roof works a little bit better. Let's get rid of these last few boards. We'll copy this wall around, move, mirror a copy, and in this case we'll be copying around the center, So it's represented properly. Looks like I made a mistake. Let's just check that. So the center of the stud should be here. Yeah. I hadn't moved that wall into place before I started. Let's move that one in so that's centered. Now in our previous details, we were looking at different ways of connecting the floor. And so this will be a similar sort of detail as this. And so we want to have a concrete slab. I'll redraw this just from scratch to make sense of it. So the concrete slab in this case is going to start underneath the frame. I don't need it to stick out any further. We can just make this slab 100 mil thick. And then we might have a thickened edge beam at the bottom. And so that might just be an additional 300 by 300. And that should generally be sufficient for a shed. 300 by 300, meaning the total depth of the beam is 400 and 300 millimeters wide. So we can see here that this isn't a very nice finish. And so we need to stop this weatherboard from pushing back against. So we can block that out with timber. And in order to finish this off, I could just leave it like this, or I could add some type of flashing that would need to go down. Now we need to have a waterproof membrane, damp-proof course, Termi-Mesh, something like that, underneath here. So this could run down the face, underneath the bottom plate, and then down the edge of the slab, but that's not necessarily going to be very attractive. And so we may choose to either extend the weatherboard down, or we may choose to run ColourBond flashing down to make that a nicer looking detail. When we get to the top, how does that work? So again, we just copy all these across or down. Now in this case I made a mistake in explaining that because I hadn't allowed for the wall thickness. So the ceiling joist would typically go all the way across. In this case I don't really want to have to notch the rafter. I could, but let's bring that up for now. And we can see now that it's having a different relationship with this. So where do I want this to sit? Do I want to have a flat ceiling joist? Having a flat ceiling joist is useful because it's acting as a triangulation which stops the walls from spreading in. Now, it's also helped by having a ridge beam that spans from one side to the other. So either way can work. But what this might mean is instead of having the ridge beam running all the way through, I could always run the ridge beam on top of the ceiling joist. And we'll increase the angle of this rafter . And that means that's now 13 degrees. So we've adjusted it slightly based on understanding it in section, and that gives us a better picture of what we're trying to do. We'll go back and we'll fix up the rest of the stuff that we'd had a look at before. So we go back to making that a 450 overhang. 450 off the stud, not 450 off the cladding for clarity. We then want to add roof battens. So in this case, I'll make it a 45 by 45 batten. And we'll have those battens at 600 centers. Just like before, we can copy this information. I could copy all this. We're not going to worry about making it as complicated as this one. More like this one. So we can grab this and repeat this information. And we'll duplicate that. And we'll rotate this up into position. Now, because we only were doing a wall section detail before, we didn't look at other details like ridge capping. And so once we've done all of this extra detail, then we can have a look at how we do those other elements that we haven't seen previously in order to be able to draw this entire section.